Hello and welcome to our special coverage of the Russian invasion of Ukraine. I am Ladi Akiriduluale. The headlines. Russia's Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov thanks Brazil for its efforts to resolve the Ukrainian war, says Russia is interested in ending the conflict. U.S. Ambassador to Russia Lynn Tracy visits Wall Street Journal reporter detained in that country. And confusion reigns in Europe as several countries introduce bans on Ukrainian grain, just as others argue against them. Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov has thanked Brazil for its efforts to resolve the conflict in Ukraine ahead of a visit with Brazilian President Luiz Inácio Lula da Silva, whose comments on the war have unnerved Washington. Mr. Lavrov and the Brazilian Foreign Relations Minister Mauro Vieira addressed journalists after a meeting in Brasilia discussing plans to boost meat exports to Russia and secure fertilizer imports for Brazilian farmers.
As for the processes in Ukraine, we are grateful to our Brazilian friend for their excellent understanding of the genesis of the situation, and we are grateful for their desire to contribute to the search for ways to resolve it. We are interested in the Ukrainian conflict ending as soon as possible. We have already announced in detail the reasons for what is happening and the very goals that we are pursuing in this regard. They consist primarily in guaranteeing the absence of any threats to the military security of the Russian Federation on the territory of Ukraine. And the West has been implementing such plans for many years. And the second task, of course, is to protect the lives and legal rights of the Russian-speaking population of the east and south of Ukraine.
And the President of the European Union Parliament, Roberta Metsola, has asked for the immediate release of U.S. journalist Ivan Geskovich and Russian opposition politician Alexei Navalny as she opened the latest sitting in Strasbourg. The Wall Street reporter was arrested in Russia last month on charges of spying, which his newspaper and the White House have dismissed. Mr. Navalny was arrested in Russia in 2021 after years spent as a prominent opposition figure. His spokeswoman has said that he is now ill with stomach pains in jail.
It has now, dear colleagues, been 20 days since the detention of Wall Street Journal reporter Evan Gershkovich in Russia. Let me reiterate our call for his safe release and underline the European Parliament's commitment to seeing him free as quickly as possible. Journalists must be able to do their job without fearing for their lives or their freedom, and this is a line that should not have been crossed. It is a pattern that we are witnessing again and again in Russia. Jailed opposition politician and Sakharov Prize laureate Alexei Navalny's condition remains of deep concern, with journalists reporting it as critical. So from here, on behalf of the European Parliament, let me once again call for his immediate and unconditional release.
Meanwhile, the United States and more than 40 other countries have said in a joint statement that they are deeply concerned over Russia's detention of a Wall Street Journal reporter and protested Moscow's efforts to limit and intimidate the media, according to them. They also said in the statement that what was read at the United Nations by U.S. Ambassador Linda Thomas-Greenfield in part reads, "We urge the Russian Federation authorities to release those they hold on political grounds and to end the draconian crackdown on freedom of expression, including against members of the media."
We're deeply concerned over Russia's announcement that it has detained a Wall Street Journal reporter. We protest Russian efforts to limit and intimidate the media. Free, independent, and pluralistic media play an indispensable role in informing people around the world. We note the widespread outcry from both Russia and international journalists in response to this recent arrest, including an open letter signed by dozens of prominent independent media figures from Russia that calls the case against them preposterous and unjust. We will continue to advocate for press freedom and the safety of journalists worldwide. We urge Russian Federation authorities to release those they hold on political grounds and to end the draconian crackdown on freedom of expression, including against members of the media.
Well, this is a process which goes a legal procedure which is under the Russian law, and we commented it many times. This is not my piece of cake, as you know, but this is for the Russian agencies who deal with the issue to decide. And only the court, as you know, can decide whether he's guilty or not.
And the U.S. ambassador to Moscow, Lynn Tracy, has visited Ivan Geskovich. The U.S. embassy said on Twitter in a post, reads, "I visited WSJ's Ivan Geskovich at Lefortovo prison, the first time we've been permitted access to him since his wrongful detention more than 2 weeks ago." The tweet adds he is in good health and remains strong, and will reiterate our call for his immediate release. The U.S. designated Mr. Geskovich as wrongfully detained earlier this month, which gives further backing to the assertions by the U.S. government and the Wall Street Journal that the espionage charges against the reporter were baseless. It will also empower the Biden administration to explore avenues such as a prisoner swap to try to secure Mr. Geskovich's release. And the Federal Bureau of Investigations, as the FBI, has arrested 2 Chinese agents, and federal prosecutors have charged dozens of others with working to silence and harass dissidents within the United States, with some even operating an, quote, undeclared police station in New York City. Liu Jianwang and Chen Jinping allegedly operated the police station in New York City's Chinatown. Both men are U.S. citizens and have been charged with conspiracy to act as agents of the Chinese government, as well as obstructing justice. According to John Marzulli, a spokesperson for the U.S. Attorney in the Eastern District of New York, the police station has been shut down since a search warrant was executed at the location last fall. The 2 men appeared in court yesterday, with Liu being released on a $250,000 bond and Chen on a $400,000 bond. However, they are not permitted to travel more than half a mile of the Chinese consulate nor mission or communicate with co-conspirators. Neither has entered a plea. The Justice Department also announced charges against 34 officers of the National Police of the People's Republic of China with harassing Chinese nationals in the U.S., critical of the Chinese government. And U.S. Attorney General Merrick Garland has met with Ukrainian Prosecutor General Andrei Koshtin in Washington, saying those who have committed war crimes will be prosecuted, however long it takes.
For over a year, Russia has engaged in an unjust war against Ukraine, committing atrocities at the largest scale of any armed conflict since the Second World War. And for over a year, the people of Ukraine have fought with courage and conviction to protect their country. They have worked with unflagging resolve to record the brutalities committed against thousands of Ukrainian men, women, and children, and to hold the perpetrators of those atrocities accountable under the law. They have risked and sacrificed their lives in the defense of their country. The United States Department of Justice stands with them, and we are doing everything in our power to achieve the accountability necessary for true justice for Ukraine. You know, on the longer-term question of war criminals and when they might see justice, we have a very long memory, as I know that Ukraine does as well. And these things tend to not work out very well for the people who commit these crimes and are prosecuted.
And we are intensifying our work to freeze the Wagner Group's overseas assets, to deprive the group of the resources to finance its criminal activities in Ukraine and worldwide. With regard to our accountability efforts, this leak has no any influence on our work. We are united to go ahead to making all perpetrators accountable for all war crimes committed on Ukrainian soil against Ukraine and against Ukrainians.
And in another development, Ukrainian lorry drivers waited in line of dozens of kilometers at the Polish border as Kiev aims to reopen food and grain transit via Poland as a first step to ending import bans. Talks began in Warsaw yesterday as countries halted grain from Ukraine to protect their local agricultural markets. Olkis Ananikov, a lorry driver from Dnipro carrying a rapeseed, said he'd been waiting at the same spot for 2 days. His colleague from Zhytomyr, Mykola Brevin, estimated the queue to be 25 kilometers long. And Hungary's Ministry of Agriculture State Secretary Sándor Farkas says Hungary could extend its import ban on Ukrainian grains beyond the current June 30 deadline if the EU does not take sufficient action to protect Hungarian farmers. Poland and Hungary announced bans on grain and other food imports from Ukraine over the weekend to protect their local agricultural sectors, drawing a warning from the EU's executive. Some Black Sea ports were blocked after Russia's invasion of Ukraine began in February last year, and logistic bottlenecks trapped large quantities of Ukrainian grain, cheaper than that produced in the European Union in Central European countries. Meanwhile, Poland says Ukraine needs help, but the cost of the help should be spread across all European countries. Speaking during a news conference on the Polish-Ukrainian border in Damascus, Polish Agricultural Minister Robert Czelis says, "We are not against transit, but as Poland, we must have a 100% guarantee that the products that have destabilized our market, in particular the agricultural market, will not be left behind in Poland." Local farmers say the ban has lowered prices and reduced their sales. However, the government's under pressure to act, having asked the European Union for a response. And Slovakia's government banned the import of grains and other farm products from Ukraine, but will keep borders open for transit to third markets. That's according to the Agriculture Minister, Samuel Vulcan. Mr. Vulcan told a televised news conference that restrictive measures to ban grain imports imposed by Poland at the weekend had led to the Slovak ban. Slovakia banned the distribution of a batch of Ukrainian grain last week after it detected higher than allowed levels of pesticides in the shipment. Mr. Vulcan did not present the full list of farm products and food, but a proposal for a meeting included wheat, rye, barley, oats, corn, sugar beet and sugar itself, wine, fruits and vegetables, sunflower seeds, rapeseed, honey, and among others. Let's talk to the President Cohen and Woods International. Stephen Hayes joins us from New Brunswick in Canada. Good morning to you, Stephen. As always, a pleasure to see you.
Good morning, Lonnie. Same to you as well.
Let's, given your background, this is right up your alley. This issue of bans on agricultural products export. This was long in coming. I mean, there were several people who thought this would happen eventually because, as we both know, Ukrainian grain is cheaper than grain produced in the EU. And for those countries that have a large agricultural sector, this was going to be some kind of deal breaker, right?
Well, sure it is. It's. I think that certainly the Russians were hoping this was going to happen sooner than later. But the fact is that Ukraine now, because Russia is putting the, I'd say, the screws on in terms of the grain deals to transport to Africa, among others, then Ukraine is going to need those routes through Europe. It's not simply going to compete with Polish or Slovak or Hungarian grain. It's they need those routes to transport grain to Africa and other areas. So it's becoming a very complex situation. It's not so much the competition at the local level, because again, Polish grain will have priority of Poland. But in fact, the transport. But the problem with that too is that Poland and other countries need those same transportation systems, those same airplanes, the same ships to transport their own grain for products. So yes, it's becoming very complex.
Do you see this as some kind of uh, potential crisis, perhaps, especially considering that the European Union had already said, when the first set of bans were imposed, the EU had said, look, this is not allowed, this is illegal, and they wouldn't accept this. And then other countries then went on to impose similar bans. But some of them have made it clear that they're not against Ukrainian grain passing through their countries onto other countries. What they're against is Ukrainian grain staying in Poland, Hungary, Slovakia, and depressing the local market, which is what you just talked about, right?
Exactly. So I think, again, the importance is that they've got to differentiate between what's staying and what's going, what's in transit. But again, even in transit, there's that competition for a supply chain. Because again, every country needs that supply chain. Poland's prices are not simply determined by local markets, determined by the international market and what they can sell abroad. If they can't get access to the supply chain because Ukraine is now taking that supply chain, then that's a problem. And I think that Poland's point that which was mentioned in your newscast is important, that all of Europe, or the EU, needs to come to a solution on that and not simply put the pressure on Poland, Hungary, or Slovakia. But Slovakia has clearly stated that transit is fine with them, and as it should be. But it's just, all this is going to have to be worked out. It's very clear.
Coming to the conflict itself, of course, I know that you have heard about what is being referred to now as the Pentagon Papers leak, I wondered if you could. We've heard so much about the impact it has had on diplomatic relations with several countries who the papers seem to reveal had been spied on. Some of their leaders had been spied on by the United States, and then it reveals certain tactical information about defense positions. But in terms of how this is playing out within the United States, is it shifting the needle in any direction in terms of the U.S. support for Ukraine?
No, I don't think it is at all. I think that it's been more a question of how in the world is security so bad that a 21-year-old National Guardsman would have access to that security and also be able to circulate it for a couple months as a means of boasting to his friends. I mean, it's an absurd situation that I think has to have a lot of answers. So I think the issue within the U.S. is not how does it affect Ukraine, but how does it affect the Pentagon's ability to keep secrets. There's no leader in the world that would be surprised by anything in those papers that we're monitoring other allies. Our allies do that with us. That's a normal process. Unfortunately, you just don't talk about it. You don't become embarrassed publicly by that. That's just one of the realities. They may deny, nobody's denying it, in fact, but in fact, we all know that goes on.
Do you think any or all of this various developments, including what we've just talked about, the trade bans, or possibly, this leak of highly classified documents, or in fact even the situation with the Wall Street reporters' arrest and all the other U.S. citizens detained in Russia, is giving the Russians some kind of leverage in this interaction with others? I mean, the Brazilian president was in China, and what he said while he was in China unnerved Washington. And then now you've got his foreign minister and the foreign minister of Brazil tending to clarify those points and expand on them. Now, these are two huge countries and huge trading partners as well, which are important to Washington in terms of world political order.
Well, President Lula has never been an admirer of the United States. His stance has been very anti-U.S. historically. At times, sometimes it's easy to understand why it would be. At other times, it's more doctrinaire, ideological, and so it's not. It shouldn't be a shock to anyone that Brazil is talking to Russia and China. Simply that has been a course of history. So I think also what is interesting, though, of course, as you might mention, those are big countries. That's the largest country by population and size in South America. And we need to, from the United States point of view, look at that as well. But I don't think the United States is shocked by it. I think it's, as I've likened this whole war to a giant chess game, this is one more piece, so it's almost a multi-level chess game. It's one more piece in the chess game. To your question, does it give support to Russia? I suppose it does. It may not be the most, intended as by President Lula as supporting directly Russia in that regard, but it certainly gives comfort to Russia. I think one of the biggest news items that is just broken is Prigozhin, the head of the Wagner Group, saying that Russia needs to end the war. That's very interesting to me that a person so critical to Putin would now be calling for Putin to end that war. And I think in some ways Africa has played a major role because of the Wagner Group, which I liken, and I don't think it's an outrageous comparison to the SS of Germany, because it is a private army controlled by the head of the government. Is the Wagner's group role in Sudan now? I think the Wagner Group is going to be stretched very, very tightly, and so I think that's going to play a role on Putin as well.
Anytime I have you on, of course, I try to link all of this to U.S. politics, and the reason is obvious, because the United States is the biggest supporter of Ukraine. Some have gone as far as to say that without the United States, Russia would be all over Ukraine at the moment. The war wouldn't still be on at this point. And that brings me to the state of the race, if you like. I mean, all eyes now are on the 2024 presidential elections. And even though we've got some runners, some of those runners have run into some hot water, whereas there are other runners who haven't actually publicly declared that they're actually running, although they continue to give hints. And I'm referring to President Joe Biden. On one hand, I mean, everybody expects him to run. He's given hints that he's going to run, but he hasn't formally declared that he's going to run. That's on one hand. Then you've got those who've declared. Principal amongst them is Donald Trump. And so many court cases against him. For the first time, a former or sitting U.S. president has been indicted, put before a judge in New York. I'm wondering how all of this is playing out in the race itself, do you think? Especially because the U.S. is playing such an important role in all of this, and therefore whoever leads it is going to be quite important.
I think everyone's wondering how it's going to play out. I think no one really knows for sure. I think behind the scenes there's a great hope even within the Republican Party, at least some key players, that Trump will not be the candidate. McConnell coming back to the Senate yesterday for the first time after his own illness is going to be, I think, important too, to legislation getting through, but also how the Senate, how some senators play the Trump candidacy. And I think that as you know, I've said all along, I still think that it is not necessarily true that Trump will be the candidate. As far as Biden goes, you're right. He hasn't exactly declared. He says he thinks he's going to declare, which the purpose of that, of course, is to put a hold on any Democratic challengers. So, but he is going to have to declare fairly soon. I would say within the next 2 months. He may try to stretch that longer, but as his intentions, because time has now become of the essence in the U.S. election cycle. But he still does have some time, and then we'll also see how things play out in the Republican Party. But encouraged that some good people are beginning to step up within the Republican Party as well. That gives hope.
Indeed, indeed, that is true. And as you say, we will keep our eyes on that. And of course, we'll be getting expert perspective on it like yours. Thank you so much, Stephen Hayes, for your time this morning. Do enjoy the rest of your day out there in Canada.
Thank you. As always, it's an honor. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And after the break, Polish forces carry out counter-offensive exercises a few miles from Russia's Kaliningrad base. Details in a moment. Please stay on with us. Thanks for staying tuned. Welcome back. Germany's former Chancellor Angela Merkel has been awarded the country's highest possible honor amidst reflections on her 16-year tenure at the helm of Europe's biggest economy. The first female leader of Germany, who stepped down in December of 2021, was decorated with the Grand Cross of the Order of Merit for Special Achievements by President Frank-Walter Steinmeier at a ceremony in Bellevue Palace in Berlin. At the event, attended by current Chancellor Olaf Scholz, European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen, and former national football coach Jürgen Klinsmann, Mrs. Merkel spoke of many good experiences in what others had described to her as the snake pit of politics. In November last year, Mrs. Merkel said she had aimed to convene European talks with Vladimir Putin of Russia the year before his invasion of Ukraine, but ultimately did not see any possibility of influencing the Russian president until the end of her term. Polish forces have conducted a counter-offensive exercise simulating a takeover of the strategic Vistula Split Canal. Air, ground, and sea forces teamed to train on a strategy to liberate the canal and surrounding bridges located a few miles away from Russia's enclave of Kaliningrad. U.S. Army personnel and vehicles also took part in the exercise. Inaugurated in 2022, the Vistula Split Canal, located in Skuronki, allows ships to cross the Gdansk Bay and reach the Baltic Sea, avoiding Russian waters.
Our forces, the first mechanized battalion, will try to take over the bridge, and there will be also the Moscow episode. So lots of damage in the soldiers. So there will be the helicopter which will take the wounded soldiers, and basically also there will be the support from the Navy. So in this exercise engaged are the Navy, the land forces, the air forces, and the territorial forces. You see this canal was built at so about a few months ago. So, and from this side of Poland, you can just go directly to Russia. So this is training which is very important because we are trying to deter the possible Russian aggression from there, from this part of Poland. So this bridge is the vital bridge, because this is the only one in the neighborhood which can go to the other side of land.
Meanwhile, the Kremlin says Russian President Vladimir Putin has visited military headquarters in Ukraine's Kherson and Luhansk regions, which are partly held by Russia. Mr. Putin attended a military command meeting in the Kherson region to hear reports from commanders of the airborne forces and the Dnieper Army Group and other senior officers on the situation in the Kherson and Zaporizhzhia regions, both of which Moscow has proclaimed part of Russia. Russian troops retreated from Kherson, the regional capital, last November, and have been reinforcing their position on the opposite bank of the Dnipro River in anticipation of a Ukrainian counter-offensive. According to the Kremlin, Mr. Putin also visited National Guard headquarters in Ukraine's Luhansk region, another part of Ukraine which Moscow annexed last year. And Ukraine's Foreign Minister Dmytro Kuleba visited Iraq for the first time since Russia's invasion, seeking diplomatic support from the Middle East, where Moscow has been cultivating friends. Iraq's Foreign Minister Fuad Hussein called for a ceasefire in Ukraine, saying this was the same message given to Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov, who visited Iraq in February. There are no peace talks currently ongoing in the Russia-Ukraine war. Moscow says Kiev must first accept its annexation of Ukrainian territory, while Ukraine says Russia must pull out its troops.
The purpose of my visit is a follow-up to the phone conversation between President of Ukraine and Prime Minister of Iraq. Both leaders expressed their willingness to boost our bilateral relations, because we traditionally enjoyed very good relations. And I would think it would not be an exaggeration to say that I came here to help reinvent the Ukrainian-Iraqi relations. And I am pleased to see that there is a will to achieve the same on the Iraqi side. We in Ukraine, we want peace. And of course, we have our vision of how this peace can be achieved, which is the peace formula presented by President Zelensky. We welcome every effort to restore peace in Ukraine. But there is one key cornerstone that must be laid down at the very foundations of every effort. And that cornerstone is the restoration of Ukraine's territorial integrity.
من الصعب لنا أن نكون مع الحق.
It is hard for us to support war, and based on this principle, we will always strive to be part of the solution. War ends with negotiation and dialogue. That is why we believe in the language of dialogue. That is why we negotiate or discuss with officials in Moscow, and Minister Lavrov was here in the same hall. We mentioned the same principles, and we told them that we support a ceasefire and the start of negotiation. We can say that this visit is important for the future of the relationship between Iraq and Ukraine, and also for Iraq's future role in helping Ukraine and Russia. Of course, Iraq's future in terms of several conversations to help both sides to first of all reach a ceasefire, and secondly, start negotiation.
Let's talk now to public affairs analyst Ralph Obasage. He joins us virtually from Lekki in Lagos. Good morning to you, Mr. Obasage. Thank you for your time.
Very good morning to you.
Let's begin with this issue of the fact that there are no peace talks going on at the moment. More than a year, we're approaching the end of the 14th month of this conflict now. And as you heard the Ukrainian foreign minister just say, part of that is that Russia wants particular parts of what is referred to as Ukrainian territory in order to guarantee its peace. The Ukrainians say, no, there will be no peace for as long as you are on any of our territory. These are insurmountable obstacles, aren't they?
Yeah, they look insurmountable, but there is no human endeavor that cannot be solved if the willpower is there. I was on this channel about 9 months ago when I did posit that people should look at the remote causes and the immediate causes of this conflict. And when you don't have an understanding of those causes, solutions will be far-fetched. What has preceded this is the ambition of one nation to be the sole power in the world. And the provocations came up. No matter how unacceptable the Russian invasion may look like, if you go back to the roots, you will then understand why there has to be dialogue and there has to be solution. There is no way Ukraine will not give up some of those territories, because the territories Russia is annexing and protecting are actually populated about 80% by ethnic Russians. Are you asking those Russians to quit, to go back to Russia, especially when against the backdrop of the fact that at a stage there was something that looks like ethnic cleansing by the Ukrainian authorities in their attempts to claim back Crimea. They outlawed the Russian language in those territories, in Kherson, in Luhansk, in Donetsk. They outlawed the Russian language, and there were fines imposed on those who speak the language publicly. And you don't expect any right-thinking nation that wants to protect the rights of its citizens not to come in the way Russia has done. But if you extend it further, you then begin to understand why Russia has felt bruised since Glasnost and Perestroika, which actually led to the disintegration of the former Soviet Union. It caught Russians unaware because a lot of the industrial power they had, items and facilities, were now lying in places like Ukraine, in places like Tajikistan, Uzbekistan, and it was just a matter of time before this kind of reaction came up. And against the gentleman agreement between Reagan and Gorbachev then, Gorbachev, whom I don't consider a bona fide Russian because of his actions and attitude, they've started, the US has continued to expand NATO eastwards. And the US itself will not accept the kind of, if Russia were to go to arm neighbors in around the US will react. We saw it in the Bay of Pigs crisis in Cuba, you know? So I think that's the understanding that the world must give it. And instead of Europe and the US to continue to arm Ukraine when they know that Ukraine cannot really stand up to Russia and all their facilities are being destroyed, they should spend that energy and resources to create a dialogue that will bring about peace. I am seeing glimmer of hope because throughout last 2 weeks and last week, you will find that the European president, the European Union president, and the French president were in China. They are not telling China, you are the only one that can influence Russia. They should also, while they are telling China to tell Russia to stop the war, they should also be telling the Ukrainian president to stop the war. Let there first of all be a ceasefire, and then dialogue will come on. And if there are going to be pullback of forces, Russian forces from occupied territories, that will be achieved through dialogue. But Russia needs guarantee of safety, and that safety is also apt for the Ukrainians. Ukraine also needs guarantee of safety, but I don't think the way they are going about it is the solution that we need.
Now, and that is that, you know, many people have not looked at this crisis from the root cause. They're only looking at what is happening now in terms of the developments. The position that many countries have taken is one of, pardon my use of the phrase, sit down look. They're not supporting, they're not opposing, they're in the middle. That isn't helpful if what you say is to be done, which is that there's going to be active measures towards bringing both sides together. That is completely absent at the moment. But as we look at it, one would have assumed that the United Nations would be the most logical place for this kind of thing to take place, because that's where all countries are supposed to come and ventilate. But the United Nations itself has proved to be completely ineffective. What do you make of that?
Yes, I watch you all the time, and I know you're also a student of world history. The United Nations, by and large, has become the appendage of the United States. Okay, anytime you had a very strong Secretary General of the UN who's independent-minded, the US ensures that he's got in that. You remember what happened to Dag Hammarskjöld in the Democratic Republic of Congo when he took the position that Patrice Lumumba shouldn't have been assassinated. And of course, the CIA bombed him out of the skies. So that is what you are having. So the UN has become a lame dog, a toothless bulldog. And if all these affairs are not handled well, the continued relevance of the United Nations will be called to question. It's already happening because when you look at the way Russia was locked out of the switch and international monetary settlement system, it then shows that people believe that they are wielding too much influence and powers. All the Bretton Woods institutions, all the global financial institutions are cited in the US. All global trade is denominated in US dollars. But following this war, because of the tactlessness of the West, you will find that a lot of trade is now going on, not using the dollars, between Russia, Brazil, South Africa, China. It's all denominated in either the yuan or
federations and the athletes themselves should make a choice of what they need to do. And I will tell you one more thing. They're making money by going and competing at the events. If they can't make money, then Ukrainian sport will be shut down. And God only knows when they will be able to stand back up on their feet. So this is not just a minister decision or the government decision. I have said, please let the federations and let the athletes decide, because the Olympic Games is about the athletes.
Thanks for being with us. That's the wrap-up of the program, A Russian Invasion Today. My name is Ladi Akiridoluale. Do have yourselves a pleasant Tuesday ahead.